Hello, this is going to be my module 4 reflection. We're going to talk about prompt 3. We're going to kind of dive into the adaptation and the transition into a new culture. So for some people, it is harder for them than others to be able to transition easily into a new culture. That could be for many number of reasons. I will say one of the ones that I think stands out to me the most is whether they have communication skills with that new culture. So if they speak the same language, that kind of breaks down that barrier a little bit, and it'll be easier to communicate with the new culture, people in the new culture, so they won't feel as isolated. And then same thing if they also if their cultures share some similarities, it'll be easier to communicate with them and easier to kind of build a basis with them, versus if you're someone who's going into a new culture with a big language barrier and you don't have any similarities at all. So that's going to make it a lot harder to really dive into that new culture, and you're going to feel more of a culture shock. Everyone's going to go through a culture shock no matter what, and it just really depends on the individual how long they stay in that culture shock. So if you're going into a whole new culture that has essentially no similarities at all with the culture you're coming from, you're more likely to stay in that culture shock versus kind of easing into a culture that you kind of share some similarities with. Another thing that I think plays a big role as well is really going to depend on where you're moving and if essentially you're accepted into that new culture. So that's kind of like an outside factor, how accepting other people are going to be of you coming into their culture, and how they treat you and how isolated you're going to feel. So if you're not really accepted, or it's a completely different culture, it's going to be harder to really adapt and assimilate versus someone who's kind of the ropes a little more. For example, right now in the United States, there's everything going on with all the immigrants getting deported and such, but you do see a lot more of Latino immigrants getting deported versus immigrants from Europe. And that's because the country as a whole and a lot of people do, I guess, accept European immigrants a lot more than they accept immigrants from, say, Mexico or Honduras or Guatemala, anywhere in Latin America. So I feel like that's kind of the thing that plays a big factor as well, how accepted you are into the new culture. And then also it depends on the individual whether they want to really dive into that new culture, because a lot some people do come into the new area voluntarily, but other people it was kind of forced and they had to involuntarily come into the new country. So really I feel like if you're voluntarily coming, you're more willing to put in the effort to really dive into that new culture versus someone who does not want to be in that new area at all. So obviously if you don't want to be here, you're not gonna put in the extra effort to try to accept the new culture.